Welcome to the PR in Lockdown podcast, your guide to PR and communications in a post-lockdown world. I'm Rob Double, founder and director of Access Studios, a specialist production and content consultancy to the PR industry. In this episode, I'm talking to Richard Fogg, CEO of CCgroup. We look back on Richard's response to the pandemic, how he's leading CCgroup into a new post-lockdown landscape, and we gaze into the crystal ball and talk about what the long-term impact might be of COVID-19 on the PR industry. Richard, thanks for coming on the podcast and great to chat to you.
Thanks for having me, Rob.
So to start off with, just so everyone's got a good idea about you and the CCgroup, just give us a quick, 1-minute explainer of what you're about.
I don't think I'll even need that long. So CCgroup's a B2B tech, PR and marketing consultancy with 30 people in London and about half a dozen in the US. It's really easy to keep my career history brief because I've been at CCgroup for 21 years this month. So I started as an intern way back when, became CEO about 12 years ago, months before the financial crisis. And 7 years ago, ran the management buyout of CCgroup with my friend and colleague, Paul Nolan. The buyout finished about 18 months before the pandemic ruined the party. So my career is very much themed around poor timing. Fundamentally, there's three things we do. So it's all about a B2B technology brand. So we do a lot in telecoms, fintech, enterprise technology, and increasingly deep technology. So real sort of stuff like AI and quantum computing and things like that. And we basically do three things for clients. We help them raise awareness of their business and their proposition. We help them generate leads and be successful commercially. And we help them position to build value in their business, whether that's for exit or for some kind of corporate event.
So let's take a look at what happened to you at the start of lockdown. I mean, this was a few months ago now, weeks and weeks away. Seems like a very long time ago. What was the first impact for you when you realised? Well, actually, let's start first off. When did you realise something quite serious and disruptive was actually happening?
What's it been like? It's been bloody awful. I don't think you can really sugarcoat this at all. It's the worst experience I've had as a human being and as a business person. And I think you're carrying this personally, because we've all got kids and parents and friends and things like that. But then for all the people you employ, and it's been truly brutal. I think the first time we noticed it, and I sort of described this as kind of like going through grief, the 5 stages of grief at scale. The first thing we noticed was that a major event called Mobile World Congress, which takes place in Barcelona every February, was effectively cancelled for what at the time looked like a particularly virulent strain of flu. And we had a dozen clients at the event speaking, hundreds of media and analyst appointments booked, prospecting planned, events, et cetera. And we watched a very slow decline of people pulling out, and then the conference being sort of just cancelled for the first time in its history. I think then we moved to anger. So, bloody hell, we're winning all the awards this year, real sort of velocity behind the business. And it was like, now, really? Bargaining was the next phase. So we're watching chunks of revenue disappear and just trying to hold on to what you've got and to help calm the nerves of the team. Followed by, I think, reasonably able to describe it as depression, the grim realization that it's the worst environment you've ever seen. Things aren't going to get better for months, and that your business as usual strategy is kind of dead in the water. And then it's only really when you get to acceptance that it's real and it's time to react that you can really expect anything of yourself and your team.
So let's just talk about that acceptance stage. When did that come for you? Are you there at the moment? Is that where you arrived at?
I'd say a month ago, possibly 5 weeks ago. I think the way it sort of manifested was really just starting to feel more settled and more confident. At the beginning, it was just crazy. You just didn't know what was going to happen next. Had clients going on pause, events being cancelled, clients sort of being forced into a position where they have to resign, new business sort of pushing out, leads dropping out the pipeline, lots and lots of different things happening. So it was real chaos, really, to be honest with you. And of course, not helped by a sort of macro media narrative, which was very unhelpful from a scaremongering perspective. So it was pretty torrid as a time to live through, both as an individual and an individual who's responsible for the livelihoods of 36 people.
And let's talk about this CC Group and what you enacted and how you reacted to the situation that was developing. What did you do in terms of your staff and in terms of the company? What were the immediate actions that you decided, were the best going forwards?
I think initially there were so many unknowns that we just had to batten down the hatches, and we focused on our cash position first and foremost. So we furloughed team members, we reduced discretionary spend. We did everything we could to try and safeguard the business in the long term whilst maintaining a quality of service for the clients we retained. And we retained a lot of clients, not to say it all fell apart, but the cost, I mean, if you just break that down for us, we billed about 4 million.
Wow, I was about to say, wow, my goodness.
Come back to me.
That is a scoop.
Richard Edelman could learn a lot from me. But, she's cancelled and postponed projects, clients pausing or being forced to resign. COVID-19 cost us about £200,000 this financial year, so that runs until the end of this month. And looking into the longer term, it's probably wiped between 15 and 20% of our projected revenues for the next financial year, which starts in July. Given that just to pause on that, £200,000 in your financial year. I mean, just the enormous impact that's had on you. And then you said 15 to 20% of next year's as well. Is that sales revenue you think you're going to be down? Yes, exactly. And it's coming from a variety of sources. The B2B tech space is very event driven. A dozen clients as an event with all the project fees and campaigns that you run around it, they're very significant. And we've seen some pushed back and some get cancelled. We've got clients that are reliant on events for revenue. We've got clients in the fintech space that were at the very sort of linked to Bitcoin fluctuation, and that tanked right at the beginning of the crisis. It's recovered now. We've got clients going through funding rounds and things like that. They've been delayed. So all in all, I'm pretty sure some of that will come back where events have just been delayed. But then, you're right. To forecast through into the year, if we take a worst case scenario, if those clients don't come back, then you're looking at 15 to 20% drop in sort of forecast revenue. And that sort of, we grew 30% last year. So I'm glad we did, but it feels like whiplash. And you ask about sort of, what it's like for the team. I'd say broadly speaking, we've proven to be a pretty resilient bunch. I mean, don't get me wrong, there are people struggling. I've struggled on days. The uncertainty, the anxiety, not just with the business, but with the outside world as well. So we've been talking to people a lot. I've been absolutely humbled by how supportive not just the senior team have been, but everyone throughout the organization. It's been pretty amazing, and we're just constantly talking to each other and checking in with specific individuals that we know are struggling, especially people who maybe are in house shares in London, no outside space, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of different things that you need to factor in.
Let's talk about what you expected. In those initial few weeks when you realised that something significant was going to happen, you obviously contingency planned, and you thought based on what you thought could be going on. How much of what you expected actually turned out to be what actually happened? Was it a lot worse? Was it a lot not as severe? And did you end up doing a lot of what you actually contingency to do, or did it change very significantly as the weeks went on?
I think, to be honest with you, we didn't know what to expect, and I still really don't. The idea that this is a V-shaped recession seems to have lost some momentum. We had so many scenarios running at one point, Rob, that it actually became confusing. Some were utterly apocalyptic. Some were a bit sunshine and daisies. And I'd say on balance, things are a little better than we thought they would be, only a little. We have been forced to make redundancies, which is probably the toughest set of conversations I've had in 21 years in PR. And there's a number of us that have volunteered to work shorter hours over the summer. We're holding back bonus payments, we're not cancelling them, we're holding them back, so we want to look after the cash we have in the business. So it wasn't as bad as we feared it could potentially be, but in the first few weeks we didn't expect to have to make the changes that we've had to make. I think in terms of recovery, we're putting a lot of our recovery plan based around a Harvard Business Review article called "Roaring Out of Recession," and the idea behind that is it's about balance. You can't just cut away cost and hope for the best. You can't also put all of your eggs in the marketing basket and hope that things go well as well. So we're sort of balancing cost optimization, which is mostly focused around sort of efficiency of working practices, and also sort of investment in new product development and marketing. So there's quite a lot going on, and I think importantly we've been able to bring everyone in on this. So everyone across the business has had sort of sight of these plans, has inputted into these plans. And so, we're bringing in new systems and workflows. We're developing a raft of new products. We're shifting gears on marketing. It's all going on.
Just when you say, in fact, we'll come back to this in just a second, but just to say to those listening, this is a podcast, PR in Lockdown, which is going to be recurring. You'll find it on your preferred podcast library. And of course, you'll see it in video form on our YouTube channel at Access Studios, and also on the PRCA's YouTube channel as well. We'll be back in just one second, where we'll talk to Richard about how he's transitioning from lockdown, a little bit more about what we've just heard, and also what to expect in terms of an impact in the long term on the PR industry. Richard, I'm talking a lot about the impact of lockdown before the break, but let's just go back to the challenges that you were really facing during that period. Just talk to me a little bit more about the kind of things you were going through and your team were going through.
Yeah, I'd say for me the biggest challenge has probably been internal communications, which sounds bizarre for a PR person to say, but it's so hard to know if you're getting the tone and the frequency right. You want to be positive and encouraging, but you also need to be transparent and realistic. You want to make sure everyone knows what's happening, but you also need to avoid over communicating, because the whole situation is quite saddening anyway. And so we've done a mixture of written and verbal town halls, cascades, emails, teams, and we're getting good feedback on that side of things. But it's a tough balance to strike. But I wanted to share with you, sort of the biggest surprise in this for me. And that was how late I was to the issue of Black Lives Matter and the racism in PR debate. I'd just come off the back of redundancy consultations and was pushing forward with this recovery plan, and I totally failed to read the room internally. And that was a really big miss, because I'm normally sort of pretty cognizant of the things that are important to the industry and to the team. And I think when it did hit me, I was too slow to react. I sort of worried about the credibility and authenticity of a privileged white guy speaking out on the matter, and whether it was just virtue signaling, as we see so much of that. Of course, that's rubbish. I'm outraged by the events in the US and the treatment of non-white people in the PR industry in the UK, and that outrage is authentic. And so I've actually apologized to the team for not providing the leadership that they deserve or should expect. I've been reading and listening and watching and learning, and there's a lot we've done on diversity. There's a lot we're doing and a lot we're planning, and we'll lead by example. But just a really good example. Sorry, Rob.
Yeah, just to jump in there, about the conversation you had with your team. How was that received when you came to them and had this conversation, and to some extent coming with a bit of self-criticism as well?
Very well, very positively, but it wasn't without, it was really uncomfortable. Sorry, there's the word uncomfortable has been so associated with the issues of racism, effectively, and a lot of that's due to the fact that I kind of tick every privilege box that you're likely to find, and I think I was so concerned about getting something wrong that I just froze. And actually, what you learn when you start sort of trying to understand bias and privilege and things like that is that it's okay to be wrong, but if you say nothing, then if you're not helping, you're hindering, and by saying nothing, you're hindering effectively the conversation. So I was really pleased and comforted by the way that people sort of effectively forgave me and invited me into the discussion, and we've done a lot of concrete things sort of since then. We're already, but it's really gathering some pace, and I think it's a really important thing for PR agency owners and leaders to be able to get in, sort of involved in and support. But it's a really good example with sort of how everything that's happening through lockdown, that you can lose sight of some critically important things. So probably this sort of self-induced myopia that the lockdown creates was one of the biggest surprises for me.
Yeah, it's a really good point, and it has been such a significant issue to discuss and for people to deal with. At the same time, in being a lockdown environment, an environment which is very hostile for the survival of many businesses as well. So I think that's a really good point you raise about having to balance and identify, there are more than one potentially important things that has happened during this lockdown and things that have to be balanced with. Let's just talk then about how you're dealing with the now, looking forwards to the next couple of weeks. We're now in a process of moving out of lockdown, or at least out of significant restrictions on the way people are moving and things you can do. What are your priorities as CCgroup for you and your team, but also the commercial priorities as well? How are you dealing with this coming month, let's say?
Yeah, so I think in terms of the practicalities of getting back to the office, it's going to be months. For the majority of us, there's simply no need. And the risks of travelling in on public transport to an office that would be socially distanced and half empty anyway sort of doesn't make a lot of sense.
I was just going to say, has it surprised you how much you've been able to run the business virtually, having this model of no one actually being in an office? And has it changed the way you think about the way you're going to manage your team going forwards, even after lockdown, after coronavirus? Are you going to be working more virtually, do you reckon?
Oh, completely. I think we've always been, when I, years ago, when I sort of became CEO of the company, it was quite a 1950s work culture. If you're in, you're working. If you're not, you're not working. And sort of working from home was sort of smirked at. Over the last sort of 10 years or so, it's become the norm. And most of the senior team will work from home at least 1, if not 2 days a week. What hadn't really happened was the rest of the team hadn't really followed that lead, despite sort of encouraging and nudging and things like that. And I think that will change. I think a lot more people are more comfortable working from home. I think in reality, if you look at it more broadly, if you're the type of leader who micromanages, then the last 12, 13 weeks, you haven't been able to do that in the same way. So I strongly suspect that trust will have grown quite significantly. At least I hope that's the case. I think we'll be opening the office probably earlier for people who really need to. So the people in house shares or the people who are really struggling at home. I asked the team earlier who was up for coming back to the office or who was desperate to get back to the office. And I've had basically 10% of people saying that they really, really want to get back to the office.
Really, it was 10% of your workforce.
Yeah, exactly. And these are people that do have to travel a little way to get into the office. They're not sort of on the doorstep, but that's important for their mental health, and that's an area we set a lot of store by. So I think sort of pragmatically and practically, the office is going to be empty for a while. And I think, we'll definitely be seeing more home working, more flexibility. I think probably more comfortable with the idea of part-time working as well than probably we have been in the past. So I think there's going to be quite a big change.
And what are and just in the coming, let's say 2-3 weeks, are you changing much? Are you changing or increasing some stuff or introducing new things or trying to get back into, some business parts of the business that perhaps have been down because of lockdown? What are the factors you are considering in the way you're approaching the next immediate future?
There's quite a few things going on, as I alluded to. There's a lot of sort of new, different initiatives, different ways of addressing things. I mean, first and foremost, we have a commitment to our clients to make sure that we're continuing to deliver quality, right? That's first and foremost. I think we've found, one of the big things, we get a lot of business from sort of the personal network of individuals within the organization. It's been hard to sort of grow and spread that network. So seeing a lot of online events that have networking capabilities that we're starting to understand and make use of. So there's a lot of that going on. We actually have a reasonable pipeline of new business. We've won a reasonable number of new projects from existing clients. We've had a couple of clients and new clients in the last month. There's a reasonable pipeline of opportunities, but the pipeline is still probably only at 25% of where we would normally expect it to be. So I think there's just a lot more work will go into marketing and business development, and then there's an entire raft of services that we've been sort of developing the ideas around and testing with clients. So we'll be working on evolving those as well. So it's actually quite exciting. It forces you to, the lockdown situation forces you to reconsider a lot of things that you've been doing. So rather than just add, I should imagine there'll be a decent number of things that we're actually stripping away that we used to do that no longer find useful.
That's really interesting. And in terms of the business demand side things, you alluded to it there, in terms of the demand you're seeing from your clients and new business as well. How long are you planning for there to be this continued disruption to your business and perhaps the business impact of the lockdown and coronavirus? Have you got an idea or sort of an estimation of how long do you think you're going to have to be impacted?
I would like to say that we're nearing the end, but I think that we're nearing the end of the beginning. In the next month, we will see the worst set of Q2 financial filings in American corporate history. 60% of our clients are based and headquartered out of the US. I strongly suspect that is going to drive further belt tightening. So we have modeled the next 6 months of the business on the basis that it's going to be difficult. And we've planned for that and we've structured for that. And I really hope I'm wrong. And I'm hopeful that it won't be as bad as I think it will be. But I think it could be pretty significant. And that's just thinking about the US. You'll have the same in the UK. There will be, there's a pretty unusual set of behaviors in the stock market at the moment that is probably shielding a lot more concern than we're necessarily seeing. So I hate to be, I'm an optimist by nature, but I think you've got to be realistic about the prospects of business bouncing back super quickly. It's the end of the beginning, not the end.
Let's now look at what's going on in terms of the long-term impact. Now, we've already seen, a lot of articles in the PR world and communications world talking about what the possible long-term effects and long-term impacts of this whole period is going to be. In your view, what do you see happening? How is the industry changing, and what do you expect to be the impact and the long-term effects of what we're going through right now?
As a profession, I feel like PR is on the front foot. It's quite clear that what happens after COVID-19 will not bear much resemblance to what came before. And I think there's a really big opportunity for PR to assert itself in a more authoritative way than it has before. And I think before we went into this, we saw the confidence around PR start to increase, which has always been an issue for our industry. I think, I'm no social, when it comes to the pragmatic stuff, I'm no social scientist, but even I know that we were working all more flexibly and probably productively from home. And
what
I
about,
think,
I was going to say, what about the actual, the industry services, the way PR works, and also what clients are going to expect from agencies or what in-house PR teams as well are going to want to be focusing on? What did you see there as being a change as well in that kind of demand? I've seen a lot, for instance, about the increase in crisis management and reputational services, for example.
I think it's actually going to go in a slightly different direction. So I'm what you might describe jokingly, definitely with a pinch of salt, as a classically trained PR person, which is to say I've done a PR degree. this is not an industry that really loves PR degrees, incidentally, but I was taught very much at university that public relations was all about reputation. Having now gone through 3 probably major recessions, I can tell you that the reputational side of things, in my experience with my client base, is somewhat secondary to the commercial and lead generation side of things. So I actually see PR evolving in 2 directions. The crisis comms, reputation management side of things, I think will be important for a set of clients. But then I think for another set of clients, it will be much more about how we are supporting lead generation and driving return on investment. So I don't see crisis comms and things like that being a big deal for companies like us. It's a service we have to be able to offer. But I think increasingly it's more sort of down the marketing services route. So, influencer relations, influencer marketing, social, into events, virtual events, and a whole sort of array of things that help leverage the content that we've always been great at generating, the stories that we've been great at telling, in a more direct to customer and direct to prospect way. So I think that's going to be a big change, and I think it's one that if you're preparing yourself for now, you can really get involved in.
Where can if people want to pick up a conversation with you or get in contact, what's the best way for them to reach out?
So best way to find me is probably at Telco Geek on Twitter, or I'm on LinkedIn. Yeah, Telco
That's
Geek.
A great handle.
It's back when I didn't really understand how the internet worked, but it's been with me such a long time now. I just have to stick with it.
And don't forget as well, if you're enjoying this podcast, enjoyed this conversation, PR in Lockdown is available on your preferred podcast library. And of course, if you have a look on YouTube at Access Studios or the PRCA YouTube channel, you'll see Richard and I's smiling faces back at you in the form of a video podcast as well. But thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you again very soon. PR in Lockdown is presented by Rob Double, and the guest this episode was Richard Fogg, CEO of CCgroup. It is created by Access Studios in collaboration with the PRCA.